Just days ago, the United States mission in Nigeria issued a security advisory warning its personnel and citizens to avoid military and government facilities in Abuja, citing increased global security concerns. This move has now sparked widespread discussion and some anxiety, even as Nigeria's federal government insists that the capital remains safe and secure. But this alert didn't emerge in a vacuum. It comes amid heightened tensions in the Middle East, with U.S. strikes in Iran, Israeli military activity intensifying, and a broader fear of escalation. Already, the U.S. State Department has issued a worldwide caution for its citizens, citing risks tied to protests, reprisals, and geopolitical fallout. In this global mix, West Africa, particularly Nigeria and ECOWAS, cannot afford to be caught off guard. So how do these unfolding global dynamics affect our national security, add to that our diplomatic posture, and indeed the regional bloc's fragile stability in West Africa? Let's bring in Bayo Olowoake, a seasoned global affairs analyst and strategic risk advisor with years of experience providing geopolitical intelligence to corporate clients and state actors. He helps us decode what's really behind the headlines and what Nigeria must be paying attention to next. Mr. Olowoake, thank you for joining us on the program this evening.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's begin with the big story. How do you interpret the U.S. advisory on Abuja? Is it simply precautionary, or does it hint at broader geopolitical red flags that Nigeria should be taken more seriously now?
Thank you. Well, from the way I assess the security advisory, it looks like it's actually focused on American citizens who are either visiting or are resident in Nigeria. And it has to do specifically with the action the United States has taken in the conflict between Israel and Iran. And the expectation or suspicion that there could be fallouts from that action, which might possibly target U.S. citizens in different parts of the world. Because if you do an analysis of that statement, it has actually nothing to do precisely with Nigerians. It specifically addresses U.S. citizens. But it's quite curious also in one respect, which is that it says while it advises U.S. citizens to avoid military and government facilities, nonetheless, it says they can go only for official reasons. And so you begin to wonder if U.S. citizens visit government facilities or military locations in Nigeria for social reasons. I mean, whenever they have to go to these places, it's usually in connection with official visits. So when it excludes official visits, I think that makes a nonsense of the security advisory itself. But broadly speaking, it has nothing to do with Nigerians, although it suggests as if Abuja is not safe, which is unfortunate because it essentially is trying to safeguard U.S. citizens from possible fallouts of American intervention in the Iranian-Israeli conflict.
And we've heard from the federal government strongly dismissing this advisory, assuring citizens and foreign missions that Abuja remains safe. But in your view, does this pushback from Nigeria demonstrate confidence in our security architecture, or are we underestimating evolving threats?
Well, frankly, I think we can see this from two perspectives. Our security challenges have had to do with non-state armed groups operating in the Northeast and remnants of or groups similar to them operating in the Northwest and in the central regions of the country. So far, Abuja has been quite secure and immune from any large-scale or any definitive threats from these groups. It suggests that perhaps Abuja is unsafe. I mean, a lot of events have been held, international and domestic. People have come and gone safely. So to a large and reasonable extent, I think Abuja is safe, and is not in any way negatively impacted by that statement. But I can understand the reaction of the federal government because people who are not familiar with Abuja or the socio-economic and security climate of the city, hearing the U.S. statement or reading the U.S. statement is not safe.
I, and that's the concern for government as well, and perhaps the reason why it's come out to say, you know what, Abuja remains one of the safest capitals of the world. You're watching Beyond the Headlines. Global Affairs Analyst Bayo Olowoake, thank you so much for staying the course on the program this hour. You were talking about the ripple effect of the Middle East crisis on the sub-region. You can take it up from there.
Yes, absolutely. I was saying that the major actors themselves recognize that this is not a conflict that should be allowed to fester. You will notice that, of course, the US made some strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear sites and immediately also declared, rather interestingly, that it wasn't a party to the conflict. And today we started hearing of a ceasefire that had apparently been negotiated by President Trump. The truth is that the protagonists are extremely well armed. And not only are they well armed, they are also extremely well connected within the international system to the effect that they could easily draw in states on either side of the conflict. And we are beginning to see coalitions beginning to build and form around Israel and Iran. So it was good news to hear that some sort of ceasefire was already being contemplated, because this is not a conflict that should be allowed to either continue or to expand. To that extent, I feel that this is reassuring. I also do not think that Israel and Iran can endure extensive armed conflict. Their economies cannot sustain such conflict, especially Israel, that has been at war with several in several theaters in the last couple of months. So, with regard to how this could impact us in West Africa, I think essentially it could be in the area, for instance, of our own attempts to deal with insurgencies and terrorism, which is plaguing the Sahel and the Lake Chad regions. Recall that most of the systems, the equipments, and the devices that we are acquiring or have acquired to be able to respond to these threats either come from Russia or China or the United States or Israel. So if there's a major conflict, these powers are likely to ignore our own part of the world and to focus on what is unfolding in the Middle East. And that could have implications for our own ability, to deal with the threats we face, either in terms of acquiring new platforms or sourcing spare parts and equipment for existing systems that we have acquired. There's also the risk that if it continues, it might suck us as well into the conflict, by way of some countries in Africa or our region providing support, diplomatic or otherwise, for the protagonists. So these are two very clear ways, in which a continuation of this conflict could negatively impact our sub-region and, in fact, our continent. So one would hope and expect that the two protagonists will come to an agreement and will start taking steps to diffuse the tension and to cease fire.
Absolutely. It's just that following, President Trump's assurance of a permanent peace deal, there have been reported attacks on both sides, and even the U.S. president himself has shown some frustration in that regard. We have to go now, but there are a lot of talk about the fragile security landscape across the Sahel. In a minute, if you can, explore for us whether or not you see this further weakening West Africa's already fragile peace efforts, where you consider the issue with Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and the struggle of the regional authority itself.
There's a risk that could happen. And if I quickly use the example of Russia and Ukraine, you remember that some months ago, the Ukrainians even publicly announced that they were part of an ambush against Malian forces and the Africa Corps, which is the successor body to PMC Wagner, in an encounter that took place on the borders with Algeria. Ukraine decided to go after Russia in other parts of the world as a consequence of the war which is going on between her and Russia. So if we see this kind of tendency on the part of the two protagonists, they might want to exploit our own context, to deal a blow to their adversary within this region. And this is why one would hope, like I said before, that this conflict comes to an immediate halt and that steps be taken to ensure lasting resolution. Because the ceasefire which has been arranged is simply because the interest of the U.S., you remember U.S. base in Qatar was threatened.
That's right.
And then, of course, Israel. This just cannot continue. And the powers recognize that. So they're just trying to put a stop to this. But in the deal that has been worked out, we haven't seen anything concrete to suggest that the permanent resolution of the conflict is being addressed. They just want a temporary ceasefire.
Good place to leave it. Thank you so much for your contribution, Mr. Bayo Olowoake, on the show.
Thank you for having me.